Here we are, Bonfire Midweek. Let's go. Darren Bombing. That's not Zach Schnitzer. That's our good friend, Ted Wyman. What's going on, Teddy? How are you?
I'm doing great, man. I think this is my first time on the show, so I'm pretty excited about it and looking forward to talking all things CFL.
Absolutely. Yeah, we got a lot to get to on the show. Thanks to everybody who's watching live on YouTube and Facebook. If you're on Twitter, head over to youtube.com/bonfire sports. Then you can join the live chat and be involved in the show throughout. Ted and I, well, Ted, we are going to get into a lot here because it was an interesting week in the world of not just the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, but the Canadian Football League. We saw the emergence once again of Nathan Rourke. We saw some surprising results in a couple games, including the Blue Bombers' upcoming opponent, the Toronto Argonauts, getting absolutely chewed up by the Lions this past week. But maybe let's start right where things are maybe most fresh in people's minds. And it's the Winnipeg Blue Bombers and their defense in particular. It's unbelievable to think all the way back to game one, quarter one of the season was the last time they allowed a touchdown against an opponent. The bend, don't break, the yards, but no points. It really is impressive.
Well, are you trying to, upset Mr. O'Shea right now? Because he really doesn't like that term, bend, don't break. He's like, there's not a single defense in the world that wants to bend and not break. They want to never break. But the truth is, you've seen the same thing for a couple of years now, DB. It started around October of 2019, just before Zach Collaros was acquired and brought to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. We all equate it to when Brandon Alexander moved to safety in 2019 and all of a sudden brought that defense together. And at that point, they were that defense that just would not allow people to get into the end zone. And we saw it all of last season. It was really quite remarkable what they did last year. And maybe even, it was talked about a lot, but maybe not talked about enough, because that defense just will not, if a team gets into Winnipeg territory, it changes. It's almost like, yeah, you can have some yards, but if you want to get into that end zone, you are going to have to do something really special. And the Bombers don't let it happen. They haven't let it happen so far this year. There are concerns about the amount of yards in the first couple of games, especially when Jeremiah Masoli was throwing like crazy. The secondary didn't look great. But again, what did it cost them? And in the last two games, it's 8 field goals. That is pretty damn good defense.
I think I muted myself there so I could clear my throat, Teddy. But imagine the amount of pressure that's off the shoulders of the Blue Bombers offense, especially early in the season here, where Collaros is getting used to a different mix of receivers. The offensive line has had changes and now injury to Michael Couture. So more changes there. 2 new running backs. I mean, new in the sense that they're the starters now, or Brady Oliveira's the starter and Johnny's the number 2. No more Andrew Harris. They haven't maybe been as explosive as they were at times in 2021. Where's your level of concern, or where do you feel the concern maybe should be on the offense right now? It's good that the defense is playing well. It's offsetting the offense to, score 19 or 25 points and win a game handily.
I don't really see it being that different from what I expected coming out of training camp. You've lost Andrew Harris. You've lost Drew Desjardins. You've lost Kenny Lawler. You've lost Darvin Adams. Those are all all-star players, or at least all-star caliber players. And it's not that easy to replace players like that. And the Bombers obviously have not gelled super quickly on offense, particularly that offensive line's a little different without Desjardins and now Couture as well. Brady Oliveira is a different kind of running back from Andrew Harris. He doesn't have that same dynamism. He's very good. It's pretty clear. We haven't seen much of it yet. It hasn't worked all that great. There's no doubt about it. But I also noticed that the receiving core wasn't particularly on point a lot of the time. Until last game, I thought it got a lot better. And the key to bringing that receiving game around to me was spreading the ball around a lot more. The first couple of games, everything went to Ellingson or to Dalton Schoen. And maybe late in the game, you saw a little bit of Drew Wolotarski, but there wasn't a ton going to Rasheed Bailey. There wasn't a ton going to Nick Dembski. Those guys are 2 guys who I expected to lead the team in receiving this year, or at least be close, because they were the incumbents. They were the most familiar with the offense. They've worked with Zach Collaros for a long time, and I thought those guys were going to be doing something really special. Well, we didn't see it much in the first couple of games. A lot better in the last game. I thought they were both really good. Dembski especially was stellar, and it did look, at least to me, like his injury wasn't too severe. He did miss the rest of the game, but he was walking around after, and he was on the sideline, and he was laughing and joking. We'll see when practice gets going, in the next little while. But it doesn't look like that's going to be anything long term, and I think that's important because Nick Dembski is such an important player for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. It's gelling and it's taking time. And Mike O'Shea always says, well, we just want to get better every week. Well, what have they done in the first 3 weeks? They've gotten better every week.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that's really spot on. And I'm glad you mentioned some of those receivers because, yeah, like through the first 2 weeks, as you mentioned, Ellingson and Schoen, maybe not a ton of Nick Dembski, but when the ball has been in Nick Dembski's hands or even just in his vicinity, he's made some great catches that maybe get overlooked until you see it, a second time or a third time. That changing shoulder and Collaros talking about it post game, to put it on his outside shoulder that set up the Blue Bombers touchdown, Oliveira's touchdown right before the half. That was a phenomenal play that maybe there wasn't the best angle of on the instant replay, but boy, that was a huge 40-yard catch that set up Winnipeg's first major of the game. Ted, I'm just going to pull up the offensive numbers here so people can take a look. And Brady Oliveira, 15 carries for 56 yards, averaging 3.7 yards per carry. Markedly better than the first 2 games where he was, 10, 12 touches, but averaging much less than 3.5 yards per carry. You could see the Blue Bombers sticking with the run in that game against Hamilton, and it ended up setting things up as the game progressed. In came the play action, in came some of those, more delayed throws or delayed routes. The Blue Bombers are going to run the football, whether they get 2 yards or 8 yards per carry. What's your take on that? Is it maybe an issue with the offensive line? Is it defenses maybe keying in on them because they know it's probably easier to stop a run game, a concerted effort run game when it's not Andrew Harris carrying the football? Where do you kind of lie on that?
Well, I just think it's a combination of things, DB. I mean, if you're taking Andrew Harris out of the mix and you're changing up the offensive line, it's going to take a little time for an offensive line to gel when it's got new players on it. That has been a luxury in Winnipeg for quite some time, that they've had at least 4 of the 5, and really this year they did as well. And Jeff Gray being a backup for the last couple of years, it shouldn't have been all that major of a transition, but we don't know yet just how good Jeff Gray is. It's going to take some time to figure that out. I think he's taken a few penalties that weren't too great, especially in the last game, and we're not seeing the same dynamic play from the running game. But I do think that it looks like it might not be too far off to me. I mean, Oliveira's not getting a ton of yards. That's true. Mm-hmm. But it does look like there's a chance to break something there. And the beauty of it is that you've got Johnny Augustine who can come in, and he's just a different kind of back. He's just a speed back. Oliveira's a power back. And you get that, and if you get that great push, you can really see Johnny Augustine hit the holes. It's got to be a little bit better, but you can see that what they're doing is they're mixing it up as much as they can. You get it to Oliveira, the most touches. You get it to Augustine a little bit. You might get it to Dembski, and you're going to get it to Rasheed Bailey, who had 2 or 3 carries in the last game as well on that fly sweep. And that has been a productive play for the Bombers. And I thought, probably the best run of the year for the Bombers was Nick Dembski in the 4th quarter in Ottawa, when he was clearly stopped behind the line of scrimmage, and he somehow scooted through and ended up getting 9 yards. And then they get the first down on short yardage. And that, that just shows that there's a lot of guys that can really carry the water when it comes out of the backfield. But it doesn't, I thought that game in Ottawa, that they had 115 yards rushing or something like that. And then I was hearing about how the rushing game was so bad. Well, I was going, 115 yards isn't that bad. It's just that no one player did much to make that 115 yards happen. But I don't think that was that discouraging a game in terms of the running game. And I thought it was okay this week as well. I did read a story today that said rushing is down across the league.
Right.
Perhaps That has things to do with passing being up because of the changes that were made in the CFL this year with the hash marks the way they are. Quarterbacks want to attack as much as they can, and we certainly have seen it because Jeremiah Masoli threw a bundle of passes against the Bombers, and Dane Evans threw some 40 passes against the Bombers last week too. So,
well, they just don't run. They just don't run the football traditionally, right?
So yeah, you look at the Bombers and you say, well, they're not running, but who is? That being said, their rushing numbers are low and near the bottom of the league, and that's weird to see. So I expect them to continue with it, like you said, and I expect them to get better in that area. But again, you do not have Andrew Harris anymore. You just don't. You have to find a way to make it work almost as well as when he was here, because that was a big part of why the Bombers offense was so good.
I'm just thinking out loud right now. I wonder if the hash marks have anything to do with the running game being down this year, just with everything being closer to the field, less threat of, far side passes, that sort of thing. I'm not exactly sure. I need more than a 3-week sample size in the CFL to maybe gauge that. You're right, Ted. The Blue Bombers don't have Andrew Harris anymore, but the defense has Andrew Harris this week in Toronto. It's a unique quirk in the CFL schedule. I'm thinking probably due to the Canada Day long weekend and not to be the afterthought of the afterthought in the big smoke and the Toronto Argonauts having a home game. But Monday, they will play July 4th in Toronto. And Andrew Harris, came out of the gate like a bat out of heck in week 1. Looked to kind of maybe snag himself a little bit, some soft tissue issues in his legs. He did not look nearly as explosive to me, just less pop in his running in BC this past week. That all said, you can have, Walter Payton back there. If you have the Toronto Argonauts offensive line, the way they opened up running holes or lack thereof, and the way they failed to protect McLeod Bethel-Thompson, I don't know what Toronto is going to do to fix that issue, but, I wouldn't want to be the quarterback back there. I wouldn't want to be the running back running behind them. They look awful.
Well, did anybody look good in Toronto? You can't just single out Harris. I mean, they look terrible. You look back at the highlights, and I'm going, well, yeah, Nathan Rourke was great, and I hope we're going to talk about him, and I think he deserves all the hype that he's getting. But everybody was wide open. I mean, so I don't know what Toronto's scheme was. I don't understand what they were doing out there. I expect Toronto to be better this week against Winnipeg, and I'll tell you why. They always seem to play pretty well against Winnipeg. And Andrew Harris is going to be extremely motivated to do something special against his former team. I expect to be a good push for the Bombers from Toronto on that Monday. And the one thing about that game that I wonder is maybe an ESPN game on the July 4th holiday in the US. Maybe that's why it's on that night. It's a weird one. There's no doubt about it. But it's not like the Argos sell out on a Saturday or a Friday or a Sunday either. It's probably going to be just a normal size crowd for them.
And that's sharp insight by you, though. I didn't think of the July 4th holiday in the States.
Yeah, it could be that. And I do hope that it's a good reunion with Andrew Harris, because he is truly one of the great players ever to play for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. He had 6 years here. He was nothing but outstanding. He had 3 rushing titles. It's really impressive what he's done. And Nathan Rourke is the next great Canadian quarterback, or maybe the first great Canadian quarterback. I don't know, one of the first ones. But, since Russ Jackson, it's been a long time, right? Since there was a real one.
Yeah.
And looking so good. Andrew Harris is one of the all-time greatest Canadian running backs, actually one of the all-time greatest running backs of all time in the CFL period. And it'll be really interesting to see him against his old team. He wasn't very happy about Winnipeg not re-signing him. And, you've seen that guy when he's been a little bit vengeful before, right? 2019 Grey Cup, maybe.
Yeah.
You know what he's going to do.
Kidding.
He's going to go out there and he's going to do something special.
What I've been amazed by, Ted, just, watching Twitter and my Twitter mentions and the Bonfire hotline, be sure to hit it up, leave a voicemail or a text, 816-TIPS, 816-8477. Give us your hot take here on Bonfire Sports. One thing I've noticed, Ted, is that there's so many fans out there that still have, they're hanging on to a shred of hope that Andrew Harris and the Winnipeg Blue Bombers will reunite. And it surprised me to hear that this week because of the way it all went down, with how successful the Blue Bombers appear to be so far early in the season. Maybe it has to do with the run game not being as explosive as it has been at times. But I just don't see a remarriage of these two, at least not in the near future. But it's amazing how one bad game by the Toronto Argonauts and some injury snags and that sort of thing for Andrew Harris for people to say like, oh hey, maybe he'd be willing to come back. I just can't see the Blue Bombers being able to afford $180,000 on their cap.
It's premature. It's 2 games into the season for the Argos. The East Division is as wide open as it's ever been. I mean, the Argos are still in first place. They got to win, baby.
Yeah.
I think Ottawa might be the best team, the one that I've seen. They played really well against the Bombers, but they're 0-2. So, I mean, come on. Like, you can't even start thinking that way at all. I don't think that's realistic. I think the Argos should be getting better. It really is a bad start. There's no doubt about it. But we also all agree that BC is looking pretty fantastic. So, it was 44-3. So, one team was great and one team was terrible for that to happen. But I can't say that I think that's going to happen repeatedly. I do expect a pretty strong game from the Argos this week, and we'll see a little bit more of what they have to offer because, man, the way things are in Toronto with the lack of interest on the fans and whatnot, from the fans, they can't be a terrible team this year or else there's just going to be nobody there.
Yeah. Look at this number. I don't know if you can see it if you're watching on a phone or a smaller iPad. That's points for the first place Toronto Argonauts entering week 4, albeit they have had a bye. They have 23 points scored, and they're in first place in the East Division. You head over to the West. Calgary scored 93, but allowed 80. Winnipeg's only scored 64 through 3 games, which doesn't sound like a huge number, averaging 21 and a bit per game. 41 points against in 3 games. And as we mentioned, just that one touchdown all the way back. Of course, the BC Lions leading the CFL with 103 points scored in just 2 games. People were wondering if the week 2 bye the BC Lions had, Ted, would take momentum or some wind out of their sails. It definitely did not. They laid an absolute beating on the Toronto Argonauts. You want to maybe take a quick trip around the Canadian Football League? Let's do it.
Let's go.
Okay. So to start things off, we saw Saskatchewan in Montreal. And for those watching out there, thanks for joining us live on YouTube and Facebook. And if you're watching on Twitter, head over to those 2 channels. You can join the live chat and keep you involved in the conversation here. Ted Wyman of the Winnipeg Sun, my first call to pinch hit for Bonfire midweek, and really excited to have you along, Teddy. Now, the Rough Riders went into Montreal. There was a lot of questions about the Montreal Alouettes. How are they going to ride this kind of up and down beginning to the season? For whatever reason, the Saskatchewan Rough Riders just made mistake after mistake after mistake. And all the apologists came out on the post-game shows in our neighbors to the west, Ted, where it was a short week and it was this and that. 37-13, they lose in Montreal to an Alouettes team that has been hot and cold all season. Total net yards in this game, 285 for the Rough Riders, 296 for the Alouettes. And this was a 37-13 football game. It was just the way I saw it, Ted, mistake after mistake the Rough Riders made. And now people aren't really putting them in that same conversation with the Stampeders and the Blue Bombers, and even the Lions in the West.
I've certainly seen some people say that, it was a short week for the Riders and that had a lot to do with why they weren't particularly strong in that game. But, that was just not a good performance. It was pretty much over at halftime. It never really got better. And I don't think that I still say it's just too early to make these proclamations about teams, especially after the Riders won their first 2 games. There was people saying, oh, they're the best team in the West. It's like, well, but the Bombers won 2 Grey Cups in a row. So how do you make that decision? That's all I'm saying. Right. It's like proclaiming BC the best team in the CFL right now. Yeah, they have looked really good in their 2 games. They played Edmonton, who I think most people agree they may not be terrible all year, but they were terrible so far. Toronto
Certainly.
may not be terrible all year, but they're terrible so far. And that's why BC, looking very good, has dismantled those two teams. Let's get them in against some of these other teams. And it's the same situation with the Saskatchewan Roughriders, and the Bombers for that matter. You're probably not going all the way through this thing undefeated. I've said that about the Bombers from the beginning of the year. This is not going to be the same as last year. They were running away with almost every game last year. That is not going to happen this year. And with the Saskatchewan Roughriders, they found out that you can go into a place like Montreal, and the Alouettes are going to play you tough, and they did, and they played extremely well. And I think there's a lot of weapons there in Montreal, even with Jake Winnipeg out of the lineup. Eugene Lewis still looks outstanding. A great player, and even without William Stanback, you still got the beauty of having two quarterbacks there, which I think is being employed very well by Kahari Jones, because they're both extremely capable, both dynamic, and that could work really well for them as the season goes on, because probably a 10-8 team is going to get first place in the East the way it's shaping up. And the Riders, again, I'm just not sure about them. I think you could certainly argue that Winnipeg, BC, and Calgary are slightly above them, and Saskatchewan literally could be a fourth place team looking at the crossover this year. They're going to have to show me something to be in that top three.
Yeah, I'm with you there. The Alouettes, I feel like they could still get it together. The Ottawa Red Blacks are a team, you look at power rankings, take it with a couple teaspoons of salt often, but they're way down there despite hanging with the Blue Bombers for 2 games and then having a bye this past week. Montreal, I just feel their best football is still ahead of them. That might be the case for a lot of teams right now. But that all said and done, the Alouettes get a win over the Rough Riders in week 1. Of course, the Bombers and Ticats were Friday night football. Elks in Calgary to face the Stampeders. And Ted, this game was a lot closer than I thought it was going to be. Ultimately, the Stampeders offense produced 435 net yards of offense. Edmonton, much less consistent. James Wilder Jr. averaged 4 yards per carry in this game, but just had 45 yards. Manny Arsenault decided to come out of retirement. I say that tongue in cheek and in jest, of course, but he had a nice touchdown catch in that game. I don't know. It seems like the Edmonton Elks are still trying to figure out who they are. And that's not surprising at this point, Ted, because they're a team that has a lot of turnover and things are very different than they were in years past. Chris Jones continues to be that kind of, maniacal chef in the kitchen trying to find that right mix.
He's the chemist, isn't he? There's no doubt about it. But here's one thing that Edmonton has going for them. And you just said it, Chris Jones. That guy has coached a long time in the CFL, and he's done a lot of really impressive things with a lot of different teams. And there's a reason why he was given the big job there in Edmonton, and he will get that team turned around. I do not think the Elks are going to be as terrible as they've looked. Will they get in the playoffs? That seems like a tall order because, as I said before, Winnipeg, BC, and Calgary and Saskatchewan all look pretty darn good. So the Elks are probably going to be the last place team, but they're going to be competitive, and they were against the Stampeders. And I expect to see that much more as this season goes along. And if you look at Calgary, I think Calgary has looked really good. I'm very intrigued by, I believe it is the July 15th matchup, Calgary coming to Winnipeg. That could be a heck of a game. And the first real battle between those top teams. Of course, Winnipeg is in BC on the 9th. That's going to be an interesting one, too. Just as quick segue, because then the Bombers are an extremely short week with both games on the road. We saw what happened to Saskatchewan. That could be a real tough one for the Bombers in Vancouver. But, Mike O'Shea will do his very best to have them ready to deal with that issue.
Yeah, you brought it up, and I was going to kind of save it for later, but it's worth mentioning, and I, got it right down here. 2 games in 6 days for the Blue Bombers. They go from the Eastern time zone all the way to the West Coast in a short period of time. I said this on the postgame, Ted, at Toronto, at BC with short turnover, then home to Calgary, where the Stampeders always seem to play really well at IG Field. I see this stretch of games right now, especially with their first bye not coming until mid-August. One of the last teams in the CFL to take a bye will be the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. It'll serve them well late in the year, but this could be, this could be the most one of the more difficult stretches for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Banged up on the offensive line. The defense seems to be clicking, but you and I think we're going to talk about some of the injuries in the Blue Bombers defensive backfield coming up soon. But I'll just quickly cap by saying Kadeem Carey is legit. Bo Levi Mitchell threw for 321 yards, had a touchdown and no interceptions. So, is he finally cleaning up his game to a point when those two are going? The Calgary Stampeders are going to be tough to stop. Malik Henry, 6 catches for 173 yards. When you're mixed with Kamar Jordan and Reggie Begelton, now you're that third guy and you have an explosive game like that. I think people are looking at the Calgary Stampeders offense with a bit of a different focus.
Yeah, and I think people rightly, should be looking at that and saying Winnipeg would like to aspire to have a receiving core that's putting up those kind of numbers. That's something that just hasn't happened with the Bombers yet. And it has happened in Saskatchewan with Duke Williams. It has happened in Calgary with all those good players that you just mentioned. And Malik Henry, that's not who I was expecting to, be a player of the week out of Calgary, but he certainly was, and he played extremely well. I think, Dave Dickinson's a good coach in the stem, and Bo Levi Mitchell, though many people want to write him off, is not done. And even if Bo Levi Mitchell weren't playing well, Jake Mayer is a very good player as well. Yeah. I like what Calgary brings to the table. They're always kind of in that mix, and you can just expect them to be again. As you said, Kadeem Carey is absolutely outstanding. There's no question in my mind when you brought up about the Bombers playing all these games early. They play 6 of their first 9 games on the road. They play 6 of their last 9 at home. If they can get through this stretch here,
right,
at least get a split out of Toronto and BC, win in either Edmonton or Calgary, and then you go to Montreal and there's a chance you can win there as well. They're going to be in outstanding shape if they can come out of this first half of the season with a better than 500 record, maybe a couple of games, 3 games up. They're just going to be in outstanding shape because when do they lose at home? The one team you would worry about is Calgary, because if there was any team that even came close last year, it was Calgary. In fact, Calgary had the game on the leg of Rene Paderas, who never misses, and he did. Right. He came up short, and the Bombers ended up winning that game. But, you don't remember that when you're thinking 20 out of 21 wins at home and 11 in a row or 12 in a row, whatever it is now. But, Calgary was close. And I don't think the Bombers would ever be playing a team like that and thinking that it's going to be an easy 2 points.
No, with Hufnagel and Dickinson, I'll never sleep on the Calgary Stampeders in any single game that they play. You mentioned that stretch, through to that bye, Ted. When September comes around, the Bombers play the Rough Riders 3 times in the month of September. They got a game in Hamilton and a bye week in there as well, kind of bookended by Labor Day Classic, Banjo Bowl, and then capped on September 30th. At home. So 2 home games against the Saskatchewan Roughriders this year, which I think is a great thing for the fans here in Winnipeg and even the Rough Rider fans that might be infiltrated in blue and gold country here, Ted. But it's going to be an interesting stretch and season for the Blue Bombers for a lot of reasons. To wrap up week 3 in the CFL, Toronto going into the Lions' Den and getting absolutely devoured by the Leos. It was really all about Nathan Rourke in this game. He broke a record for the most passing yards in a single game by a Canadian quarterback, set a new mark of 436 yards, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions. He ran 3 times for 15 yards as well. He was just absolutely on fire all night long. 87% passing to complement his week 1 performance where he was even better, only missing three passes in that game. they lose their running back, Butler, for a stretch of time there. They just started feeding the pill to their fullback. Toronto didn't have any answer on defense or offense. Just away they went. Dominique Grimes was the leading receiver with 8 catches on 8 targets for 143 yards. But it was Javon Catoy and Keon Hatcher and Lucky Whitehead with his old number 87 here in Winnipeg. Well, he had 87 yards in that game on 9 catches, the most targeted BC Lions receiver. Not only are there a lot of weapons in BC, Ted, not only is Nathan Rourke making things happen as a first-year starter and second-year player, 24 years old, that's all amazing. But the offensive line, I understand they faced the Elks and they faced the Argos. I would be daunted by the Argos defensive front with Oakman and Ray and some of those guys. But man, this BC Lions offensive line, it's not like it got completely rebuilt. It sure looks a lot better, more stable, more sound than those offensive line troubles we've seen when Mike Riley was behind them.
It's funny that you brought up that name, Mike Riley, because I was just sitting here thinking, can you even imagine that a player of Mike Riley's caliber retires and they get better? I mean, that just doesn't make any sense. And you saw a tiny bit of Nathan Rourke last year, but then he comes out this year and he's just firing darts all over the field. And those throws look really great. I mean, I was watching the game. I had a couple of friends around watching the game, and I'm thinking, look at this guy. Just look at what he's doing. This is something historical in the making. That's what it seems like. You don't want to overestimate anything because lots can happen. We're not going to start, comparing him to Doug Flutie already or anything like that. Sure. But it's pretty darn impressive what he's done through 2 games. Let's see what happens when he goes up against Ottawa. I think Ottawa's got a pretty strong team. They look very
good on the road.
Good D. Going to be a totally different story there, you would think. And then he's going to have to face Winnipeg, and that's going to be a challenge. But I'm really looking forward to going to Vancouver next week and getting a close look at this guy and talking to him and getting to know what he's all about a little better, and then seeing how the Bombers fare against the Lions. Because last year with Mike Riley at the helm, the Bombers beat them handily 2 weeks in a row. It was not even close. That is not going to be the case this time. It sure doesn't appear.
No, absolutely. And, this definitely isn't the last we've heard or will speak of Nathan Rourke. He's clearly got something cooking. We'll see how he is against, as you said, tougher competition and his first road game since taking over the starting position with the BC Lions. And then, of course, facing the Winnipeg Blue Bombers' vaunted defense. I don't know if he's going to be throwing for 4 touchdowns and 90% like he has kind of to start the season. So that wraps up CFL week 4. And, we popped in on the standings. The East Division still pretty much flat. Did you buy into any of the hype, Ted, in the offseason that, they got better quarterbacks and free agency helped them and they're a much better division? Did you buy into that, or were you cautiously optimistic, more cautious than optimistic like I was?
I guess I bought into it a little bit because you split the 2 really good quarterbacks who were in Hamilton, and you put one in Ottawa, and it makes a big difference because Ottawa was pretty terrible last year. But Jeremiah Masoli by himself makes that a much better team, and they brought in a lot of other players that have helped them to progress and be a much more competitive football team. And I think a team that has a chance to contend for top spot. You got Harris and Adams in Montreal, who are both very capable, and of course Dane Evans, who I've never been totally sold on Dane Evans. He does throw for a lot of yards, but I haven't seen him come up with the big games at the right times. Yeah. He sure does not like playing the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. That's 100%. That has been just a nightmare for him. And then McLeod Bethel-Thompson, who obviously has a really good arm and he can really chuck it all over the place. But if they don't have a very good scheme set up, and then that's not going to work that well. But I guess I did think that it was going to be stronger. I thought there would be probably a pretty close race in both on both sides, and there probably wouldn't be a crossover. That's the way I was thinking coming into the season. Now I'm not so sure. I think just, again, it's super early, and let's talk again in 3 weeks and see where things are at. But could there be, that possibility of a crossover creeping into my head again here? Because where are these teams going to come up with these wins? The West, the East has one win, I think, against the West right now. They're going to beat up on.
Yeah.
Somebody's going to get wins because they're going to beat up on each other. But somebody's got to figure out some way to get some wins when they're playing the Western team.
Right. And yeah, you're right. It was Montreal beating Saskatchewan for that first East over West final in the CFL so far this year. So Dane Evans is an interesting one to me too, Ted. The Hamilton Tiger Cats chose him over Jeremiah Masoli rather. Am I surprised the Ticats are 0-3? Yeah, I am. Am I more surprised that the Toronto Argonauts have looked as paltry as they have? Yes. I'm so surprised that, they stumbled their way into a win over the Montreal Alouettes. They didn't deserve to win that game. You could even argue Montreal didn't deserve to win that game. But Trevor Harris came in for Vernon Adams in week 2 and moved the ball and got them down the field and got them in position to win. And then a missed field goal gave the Toronto Argonauts a win, gave them the win instead. The Ottawa Red Blacks, I'm not... What's that?
They're in first place based on that. They barely won that game. They didn't deserve it.
It's unbelievable. Now the Red Blacks may be a bit more at the mercy of their schedule, having to go back to back against the defending champs in weeks 1 and 2, having a bye in week 3. Now they get Nathan Rourke coming to town in a game. I'm sure a lot of people that like to maybe put a sprinkle on the game here and there, I'm sure that one's got them a little bit mystified. If you're curious, you can check down in the ticker below. We've got your lines and over-under numbers for the games this coming week as of right now on sportsinteraction.com. Ted, speaking of Dane Evans, I want to bring up a moment in the game that I think got pretty viral. And it was because a lot of people couldn't find the clip online. So here at Bonfire Sports, we got you covered out there. You want to see the hit Adam Bighill laid on Dunbar Jr. Let's take the first look at it because, wow, I think it's going to be on highlight reels for a long time.
25 of 41, 237 yards and an interception. Another interception. This one out of the hands of Dunbar and into the hands of Nick Taylor. His second interception of the season, and Dunbar slow to get up after being popped in the back.
Yeah, he got hit hard.
He did get hit hard. That was obviously maybe garbage time after the Willie Jefferson touchdown, Ted, and the score at that point was the final. But a real emphasis put on just how physical this Blue Bombers defense is and how dangerous they can be when a quarterback delivers a pass on target, but they still come away with a takeaway.
Yeah, I mean, and Adam Bighill showing just how dangerous it is to go over the middle when he drops back a bit instead of just coming forward in his to come up and step up into the run or whatever. He kind of steps back, and it's almost like he's playing safety back there, and he's just waiting. Yeah. And it comes to Dunbar, and you can just see the eyes of Bighill, gets him square in the back, and it was ugly. That looked so bad, and all kudos to Stephen Dunbar for actually getting up and getting through that, because that was really something else. I heard them talking on TSN about it. It's like you cannot blame the receiver for the interception there. Sometimes the defense wins, and that's exactly what happened. Adam Bighill putting that hit on him. I think Adam Bighill was only credited with 2 tackles in that game, and they were both monstrous hits. And I think Bighill's been playing really well. I like the way the entire linebacking core has played. And I think I said this to you the other day. If I was picking the most outstanding defensive player for the Bombers so far, it might just be Kyrie Wilson, the weak side linebacker, who's just been all over the field, and he's making great plays. And I also like the way Donald Rutledge Jr. is playing at the Sam position. A little different, a departure from what the Bombers have had at that position in the past. Alden Darby last year, not that big of a player, and, more of a DB than a linebacker for sure. Mercy Maston was a little bigger and could qualify as both. Donald Rutledge is bigger than both of those guys, and
and long arms.
Who can cover? That's pretty impressive, like a Derek Moncrief type guy.
Right, exactly. Well, you know what? That was the view a lot of people got of the Adam Bighill hit. I think we can do better. I think it's worth another look.
But hard curl route over the middle. It was Adam Liegghio. Adam Liegghio, who will drop as deep as the safety at times in Richie Hall's defense. Watch this. Just separates the receiver from the football.
Absolutely textbook, and just, you know, the players on other teams are watching that and they know that it's there. You know, like Brandon Alexander might not be with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers healthy enough to play right now, Ted. And we're seeing him during practice, you know, running around and you know, exerting himself hard. So I think it's sooner rather than later for Brandon Alexander to come back. But it's Adam Liegghio. It's Malcolm Thompson. It's Dietrich Nichols. These guys are all laying big hits and imposing themselves on a defense. I wouldn't want to be facing those guys. Like somebody said in the live chat, I wouldn't. It was Arlen. There it is. Arlen Axelrod. Very, very good point. Wouldn't want to meet these guys in a dark alley. It would be bad news bears.
It's absolutely true, and I'd like to throw one more name into there. I mean, obviously, we all know what Willie Jefferson was great last week, by the way, and Jackson Defcoat can do. But I was really impressed with the play of Demario Houston coming in at quarterback, and he was filling in for Winston Rose, who did not have very good games in the first 2 weeks. It was like, hey, he leads the CFL in tackles. That's no good for a cornerback. And so the fact that he was out, obviously there's an injury there, but you know, maybe also a timeout for Winston Rose because he just didn't have a great start. Demario Houston comes in, and he played really well. I thought his coverage was excellent, and he doesn't get enough credit for the play he made on the Willie Jefferson interception. Willie Jefferson waltzes into the end zone, but It was Houston who separated the ball from the receiver on that play, and he did it. And this is a guy who hasn't played a ton, and you're putting him in at one of the most important positions on the field, at cornerback, and he did a really great job. So I just wanted to shout out to him because I thought he played really, really well. And I have to wonder, they certainly don't need to rush Winston Rose back. It doesn't mean. And then who knows, right? Like, I mean, stranger things have happened. Winston Rose is an amazing player. He was an all-star 2 years ago. He's in the NFL. He made the greatest play of the season to help the Bombers win the Grey Cup last year. Right. But you got to be on point at all times, and he was not very good in those games against Ottawa.
Yeah, he took some gambles and took some risks, and he got burnt for it. I don't know if I'm wondering that myself though. Like, could Winston Rose get Wally pipped if Demario Houston continues to play at that high level? Mike O'Shea,
but
pardon me,
it's only one game, right?
It is one game, but this is what stood out to me, Ted, is, you know, while Mike O'Shea shot it down after the game when asked, it was pretty clear to me that Demario Houston was being thrown at early and often, and it was often Dunbar. It was often, the name's escaping me now, but they were going after him, right? And throwing to that side of the field. I don't think Dietrich Nichols got targeted once. So if you're going to throw to that side of the field, it's going to be at Demario Houston or at Winston Rose or whomever is there. I think Dietrich Nichols is that good and that intimidating right now as a defender. But, you know, this is how pro football is. This is how pro sports is, but especially in football, Ted, is that you have great players. They play to a certain level. Maybe they get hurt. Maybe they don't play up to the level that, fans are accustomed to. Somebody steps in and they emerge, right? We saw it with Jake Mayer. We're seeing it with Nathan Rourke. We've seen it with a variety of players, right? And different situations. It could be the changing of the guard, but I will be with you. It's one game. We'll see. If Winston Rose is healthy, though, do you think he starts?
That's 50-50 for me, man. You're going to have to ask me again on Thursday when we get back to practice. I know that's a bit of a cop-out, but yeah.
I'm with you.
In my mind, I think of Mike O'Shea being the kind of guy that doesn't do that. You know, I don't, especially if it's an injury being the reason. Now, if it was a case where he was going, well, he's a bit banged up, let's sit him out because he didn't play very well the first two games and then see what happens. That could be a slightly different story. But if it's a straight up injury situation, I don't see Mike O'Shea making that move, especially with a veteran player. who he respects and really likes. But again, like, this is kind of like when Drew Brown came in to finish off that game against Ottawa and got a win for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers because Zach Collaros was hurt. That was a pretty good situation if you're the Blue Bombers or their fans, to see that you've got a backup quarterback that can handle that kind of situation. And I think it's pretty good for the Blue Bombers and their fans to see that they have a player like Demario Houston who can handle that kind of situation as well.
Yeah, Drew Brown was clutch. Demario Houston, when he needed to be, he was clutch, and it showed in that Willie Jefferson interception, as you mentioned, Ted. Some of those guys and some of those plays away from maybe where the celebration is need to be highlighted, and Demario Houston made a heck of a play amongst a few back on Friday night. This question I have on the screen right now: what is the key to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers defense? Is it the defensive line? Is it the linebackers? I understand the DBs have taken a lot of heat this year, and Winston Rose maybe most primary among it for letting some big plays go to the Ottawa Redblacks. Often I've heard, Ted, on the Bonfire hotline or in the live chat, this team is missing Brandon Alexander. This team is missing DeAndre Alford. This team is missing Mercy Maston or an Alden Darby, that level of veteran player at the dime. Do you see it that way? Or, is it maybe just too much of a focus on an area where, early in the season, just judgment falls where plays have happened?
Look, if I were answering this question and I was putting them in order, I'm saying, the D-line and the linebackers are pretty close. I'm going to say it's like the front six. It's really the front seven, but the cover linebacker is more of a DB a lot of the times. The Bombers are utilizing Rutledge a little differently than they did Alden Darby, but really, you're talking about a pretty elite group when you've got Jackson Jeffcoat and Willie Jefferson and Adam Bighill and Kyrie Wilson among those front six players. And I'm not to take anything away from Jake Thomas, Casey Sales. They're doing a good job in the middle, and Cam Lawson as well, and Ricky Walker's been in there. And the Bombers, what I think is the key with the Bombers is that they just build around those great players. And they make sure that, you're not seeing the same defense very often. There's all kinds of different players coming in. There's a great rotation of what they do there. Jefferson's not in the same place. Big Hill's all over the place. He lines up. He could be rushing the passer or dropping back and being the safety just as easily. And it just makes such a difference for how you plan against that team. So I absolutely say that is the key. I think the defensive line from last year and so far through to this year is really what drives that whole defense. But you've also got Big Hill in the middle, and he obviously was the most outstanding defensive player last year for a reason. And we'll see. For me, the jury's out on the defensive backs at this point. I thought Houston played really well. I think Nichols has been absolutely outstanding. Nick Taylor's looked pretty good. I don't have too much of an issue with Taekwon Glass, so I think that's probably going to be a pretty decent group. But you do want to see, and I don't want to take anything away. I thought Malcolm Thompson in game one, I didn't like the way he was looking out there. He didn't seem to be making the proper attack to the ball, but he's looked better, and he's certainly a good hitter. But I think when you do put Brandon Alexander back in there, what it really does is it brings that communication back. And the Bombers are built on that. That defense is built on that. Those DBs flourish when they have that communication from him. You've got Big Hill in the middle doing the communication for the front seven, and it just seems to just flow together perfectly. So I'll reserve judgment of what the best group on D is until we see when that DB group is at its best.
I think that's all really well said by you. And thanks to everybody who's in the live chat. Karamjeet, that's a really nice compliment. Appreciate that. Same goes back to Bruce in Ottawa. Rob and Scott and Waiters, everybody who's chiming in. Paul Friesen the second, I like to refer to him as, not Paul Friesen proper here in Winnipeg when it comes to sports, at least. Arlen and Tyler and Sandy and everybody who's checking in. Appreciate you watching live on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Ted, before we wrap, I want to call attention to somebody who they do just absolutely great work, and it's our friends at Antonyshyn Roofing. They've been doing it forever. They did my roof a couple years ago. They installed a sun tunnel, which is like a really cool thing. If you got like a dark room or a dark bathroom or a walk-in closet, you want some natural light in there, but there's no windows, you can put a tube through your roof and have natural light come in from a lens on your roof. It's a really cool thing that they do, but these guys are awesome. I went out and got a ton of quotes, probably more than I should have, and it was an easy decision to go with Antonyshyn Roofing. So more information in the video description below. You can give them a call, 801-4666. Danny and his team are awesome. They do roofing, soffits, repairs, new builds. If you got snow, they'll help you with that stuff too. So great people there, and just want to thank them for their support of Bonfire Sports. Ted, when it comes to Winnipeg, like facing Andrew Harris and the Toronto Argonauts, everybody's talking about Harris being fired up for this game, and no doubt he will be. I wonder if the Blue Bombers want to show Andrew Harris or show everybody that without Andrew Harris, we are still an excellent football team. Maybe they want to get the run going. Maybe they want to stop Andrew Harris and not allow Toronto to have a run game. That internal battle of, I don't know, just like personal pride or team pride, I think is on the line as much as anything this week.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I don't see that with a Mike O'Shea team. I think he wants to win every single game, and he wants to beat the crap out of the other team every single time. The fact that it's Andrew Harris on the other side, or that they want to show him anything, I really doubt it. I think he's going to game plan to go in there and try to win that football game as best as possible. And I think he's going to remember, he likes to say, well, whatever happened last year is whatever happened last year. We don't think about it. But I'm sure he's going to look back a bit on those two games that they played against Toronto last season. And Toronto played the Bombers well. And they played them really well. And in fact, they really were the only team to beat the Bombers in a meaningful game last year. Yeah, the Bombers lost in Calgary. They lost to Montreal. Not really meaningful games. So this one, those ones against Toronto Toronto took it to them. They absolutely beat them down. That was with Nick Arbuckle at quarterback of all people.
Right.
And he's moved around a bit since, but this time you're gonna get McLeod Bethel Thompson, who's proven to be a pretty good thrower, and he's probably gonna go and attack that secondary, and he's gonna take advantage of the fact that things are a little bit more opened up with those hash marks and some of the other rules, and he's gonna try to get Andrew Harris going, and the Winnipeg Blue Bombers are gonna do everything they can to stop that, knowing that if they can make them one-dimensional, it'll be a lot easier. I think I could answer that question. I could ask Mike O'Shea that question and know his answer before he even says it. And I think you could probably go to Willie Jefferson and say, what's going to be the key? And it's going to be, well, we got to get after McLeod Bethel Thompson, and we got to stop the run. Well, there you go. There's your keys to the game, right? And whether you've got pride on the line or not, those are still going to be the keys to the game.
Yeah, no, Ted, that's why I appreciate you, because you can check me and put me in my place without being too hard on me, like maybe Jeff Hamilton does when we have our conversations about football here in Canada. What's that? Who? I don't know. I'm lost there. But quickly, I'm going to pull up and as we kind of put a wrap on Bonfire Midweek here, and thanks to everybody for watching. Here is that's tough to see, but if you're in our fantasy football league, Parker East continues to dominate with 331 points. Tedley too, with a little bit of a hat tip to our special guest co-host tonight, Tedley in second place. And then if we head over to our Bonfire Pick-Em, CJ was in the live chat earlier saying, check out the Pick-Em, because he was in first place, 3,100 points, putting on a pretty good margin of victory or margin of lead right now between him and the rest of the opponents. How about Tedley? He's in the top 3 of both of our fantasy leagues. If you want to get involved, links in the description to this video, so just below. But if you haven't yet, be sure to subscribe. Give us a thumbs up. Give us a like. If you're watching on Facebook, give us a follow. All of that helps us continue to give you this free content and coverage of your favorite team, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers in the Canadian Football League. Teddy, this was fun, man. I would love to do this again.
Cheers, my friend.
All right. I'll let you get back to those cold ones. Coldies, as our good friend Chris Walby likes to call them. For those asking, Zach is good. He will be back next week. Ted, really appreciate you doing this, buddy. I will see you at practice on Thursday when the Bombers get back to it.
My pleasure to be here, DB. Lots of fun. Always love to talk football, and especially about the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. This has been a cool year in that sense because we're around them more than we have been in the past couple of years. Obviously, not at all in 2020. And last year, it was a lot of Zoom calls, not a ton of personal interaction. I got to admit, I think you can almost tell it from the players that they appreciate the personal interaction as well, as opposed to what we were doing in the past. So it's a lot of fun to be around it. It's going to be one heck of a busy next 6 weeks for the Blue Bombers, and it'll be really interesting to see where they are come August long weekend.
No, agreed there. So before we sign off, we got to have one more look.
Will drop as deep as the safety at times in Richie Hall's defense. Watch this. Just separates the receiver from the football.
Oh, absolutely just bent him. What an unbelievable hit. I know people wanted to see it again, so I had to give him to him, Ted. I hope you understand.
Memorable, man. Really memorable.
Absolutely. Okay, thanks everybody. Appreciate you. Back next week at 7:30. Pre-game will go Sunday. Game day Winnipeg here on Bonfire Sports. Post-game as always. Appreciate you, everybody. Thanks, Teddy. Talk to you soon.
Hey, guys.